How did ancient humans fall in love? Almost everyone pictures the same scene when they think about prehistoric romance. A club, some hair, a cave. Drag her back, done deal. That image feels ancient. It's actually Victorian. It's mostly made up, and the real evidence buried in the ground tells a stranger, more human story. One with fake love stories, real ones, and a genetic twist nobody saw coming. Let's start by burning down the myth everyone still believes. The wife capture myth. Here's the thing about caveman drags woman by the hair. It didn't come from archaeology. It didn't come from any fossil, any bone, any dig site. It came from a 19th century Scottish anthropologist named John McLennan, who published a theory claiming that early human societies practiced systematic wife capture, men violently kidnapping women from rival tribes as the default method of finding a mate. Victorian novelists loved it. Writers picked up McLennan's theory and ran wild with it, publishing decades of prehistoric fiction full of brutish cavemen clubbing women into submission, all dressed up as serious anthropology. That fiction is where the image comes from, not a cave painting, not a skeleton, a guy with a typewriter. And here's the part that should really bother you. Scholars went back and checked McLennan's actual evidence, and the modern consensus is that he was almost entirely wrong about a universal prehistoric system of wife capture. There's no archaeological pattern that supports it as some default human mating strategy. It was a theory, it was popular, and it was wrong, and somehow it's still the first image that pops into your head when someone says ancient love, which means the whole romance was violent starting point this topic usually opens with is fiction wearing a lab coat. So let's throw it out completely and look at what was actually found in the dirt. But not every ancient love story that makes it into headlines is real either. Sometimes the ground tells you one story and the truth is something else entirely. Narshov, the lovers of Modena. In 2009, archaeologists in Modena, Italy uncovered two skeletons buried between the 4th and 6th century AD, positioned hand in hand, facing each other. Journalists nicknamed them the lovers of Modena, and the story wrote itself. A man and a woman locked together for over 1,000 years. A real-life ancient romance frozen in the dirt, except nobody had actually confirmed their sexes. The bones were too degraded for traditional analysis, so for a full decade, the lovers of Modena existed purely as a headline everyone assumed was true. Then in 2019, researchers ran a new technique, analyzing proteins preserved in tooth enamel, specifically a protein called a melogenine isoform Y, which only shows up in males. Both skeletons had it. Both of the lovers were men. Researchers now think they may have been war comrades who died in the same skirmish, or possibly relatives, cousins, maybe brothers, buried together out of family obligation, not romance. Nobody's ruling out that it could have been a romantic relationship, but the lead point stands. An entire decade of ancient love story headlines was built on an assumption nobody had actually verified, which is, you know, a little embarrassing for everyone involved. But 2 years before Modena's skeletons were even dug up, archaeologists found a couple where the evidence actually does point exactly where you'd hope. The lovers of Valdoro in 2007 near Mantua, Italy. Archaeologists excavating a Neolithic site made a discovery that immediately got compared to Romeo and Juliet. Two skeletons, a young man and a young woman, both around 20 years old, buried face to face with their arms and legs entwined around each other. The burial dated back roughly 6,000 years. Here's what makes this one different from Modena. There was no violence, no trauma, no sign either of them died a bad death, and their positioning wasn't something that could have happened by accident or decomposition. Like someone had deliberately arranged their bodies this way after death, wrapping them together on purpose. The lead archaeologist on the dig, Elena Menotti, refused to let the skeletons be separated for lab analysis the normal way, bone by bone. Instead, the entire team cut out the whole block of earth the couple was resting in and moved it intact so the two would stay physically together the way they'd been found. 6,000 years. And someone still didn't want to be the one who pulled them apart. That's the earliest solid physical evidence we have of what looks like a genuinely deliberate romantic burial gesture. But it turns out Valdaro wasn't unique. Thousands of miles away in a completely different culture, archaeologists found hundreds more. The Siberian second birth graves. In the Siberian village of Stary Tartas, archaeologists uncovered something on a scale that dwarfs every other find on this list. Not one embracing couple. Around 600 tombs dating back roughly 3,500 years, containing pairs locked in what researchers described as post-mortal hugs. Their bone hands still clasped together. 600. That's not a rare romantic gesture. That's a standardized cultural practice, repeated across an entire community generation after generation. And here's where it stops being a simple love story and gets genuinely strange. Some of these tombs include children buried alongside the embracing pair. One leading theory researchers have proposed isn't about romantic love at all. It's that the burial pose represented something closer to a second birth, a ritual re-entry into some kind of afterlife cycle, almost like reincarnation. So the position that looks, to modern eyes, like the most romantic image imaginable, two people holding each other forever, might have actually been a religious technology, a ritual mechanism for restarting existence, not a monument to how much two people loved each other. 600 tombs of what looks like eternal love, and we're not even sure love is what it was about. But at least one grave in this story leaves very little room for a purely ritual explanation, because in this one the evidence suggests a choice was made, and it was made while someone was still alive. The woman who chose to die. In western Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered a Bronze Age burial belonging to the Vysotskaya culture, a group whose graves were already known for unusually tender positioning. Men kissing a woman's forehead, hands held, bodies angled toward each other. This particular grave went further. A man and woman were found locked in a tight embrace, foreheads touching, faces angled toward one another. And according to the archaeologists who examined it, autopsy analysis determined that the woman's specific position would have been physically impossible to achieve if she had already been dead when she was placed into the grave. Read that again. Not impossible for someone else to arrange her that way. Impossible unless she arranged herself that way, meaning she was still alive. The leading theory is that she chose to die to join her partner, possibly by taking poison voluntarily, so that her body would settle naturally into that final embrace as she passed. Which is, you know, an enormous thing to conclude from a skeleton, but the physical evidence is specific enough that researchers are willing to say it out loud. If that sounds like an isolated extreme case, it isn't. A strikingly similar story shows up again more than 1,000 years later on the other side of the world. The Datong murder-suicide in 2020 in Datong, China. Archaeologists excavating a cemetery of roughly 600 tombs from the Northern Wei dynasty found one that stood out immediately. A man and a woman buried in a single coffin, arms wrapped around each other's waists, her face resting against his shoulder. On her finger, a plain silver ring, still intact after roughly 500 years. Skeletal analysis found something specific. The man had an unhealed, infectious fracture on his arm, evidence he likely died from injury or illness. The woman's bones, by contrast, showed no comparable trauma or disease. She appears to have been healthy. Researchers examining the case now suspect she may have taken her own life specifically to be buried beside him. Not a coincidence of timing. Not two people who happened to die around the same period. A choice made after his death to join him in it. The research team studying the burial wrote that direct physical evidence of love preserved in skeletal form is exceptionally rare. Most of what survives from history are monuments and poems, not bodies still holding the position of the choice someone made. A silver ring on a finger for 15 centuries is about as close as archaeology gets to proof. Every story so far has been about what humans chose. But the next discovery isn't about choice at all. It's about biology making the decision for an entire species, tens of thousands of years before any of these graves were dug. The Neanderthal type, modern genetics can now read attraction patterns directly out of ancient DNA, and what it found rewrites the entire primitive brute stereotype most people carry around about Neanderthals. Researchers analyzing the genetic mixing between humans and Neanderthals found something unexpected. The interbreeding wasn't random. It was disproportionately human women reproducing with Neanderthal men, alongside Neanderthal women who already carried more human ancestry. The simplest explanation researchers landed on was mate preference, meaning Neanderthal men and Neanderthal women who looked more human may have been considered more attractive as mates by the humans they encountered. Flip that around and it gets even stranger. Researchers also noted that human women who crossed paths with Neanderthal men may genuinely have found them more appealing as partners, not tolerated out of necessity, but actively preferred. That's not two species awkwardly overlapping by accident. That's something that looks a lot like an ancient dating market with actual preferences in it, 40,000 years before anyone invented the concept of a type, which means somewhere in your own DNA, if you're of non-African descent, there's a decent chance a Neanderthal ancestor was somebody's actual first choice, not a last resort. If attraction has been quietly steering evolution since before modern humans even existed, one researcher has a theory that takes this even further. He argues romance didn't just steer who we mated with, it might have built the human mind. The mating mind evolutionary psychologist Jeffrey Miller has a theory that sounds almost too strange to be serious, except a lot of researchers take it seriously. His argument, human intelligence intelligence, creativity, humor, even language itself may not have evolved primarily for survival. They may have evolved as courtship displays. The comparison Miller uses is peacock feathers. A peacock's tail doesn't help it survive. If anything, it makes survival harder since it's heavy and impossible to hide from predators. It exists purely because peahens prefer it, so it kept getting passed on despite the cost. Miller's argument is that human wit, storytelling ability, and creative intelligence may have evolved the same way. Not because smarter humans survived better, but because they got chosen more. And here's the twist Miller adds that a lot of older evolutionary theories missed. This wasn't just males performing for females. If courtship shaped the brain, it likely shaped it in both sexes roughly equally, since both were doing the choosing and the performing, which means every clever thing you've ever said to impress somebody, every joke, every story stretched a little for effect might be running on hardware that exists specifically because it worked for someone a very long time ago. Romantic performance may not be a distraction from being human. It might be one of the reasons humans got so smart in the first place. And if that sounds like ancient history that has nothing to do with your phone, one last piece of data closes the loop, monsieur. The modern number. Researchers running large-scale analysis on online dating behavior found something that lines up almost exactly with decades of evolutionary theory. Across huge data sets of real dating activity, women consistently showed higher selectivity thresholds across mate preferences than men, meaning on average, women filtered their potential pool of partners more tightly than men did. That's not a new pattern created by dating apps. It's the same selectivity difference evolutionary psychologists have been documenting for decades in completely different contexts, going back to speed dating studies and long before that, evolutionary mate choice research rooted in the same Pleistocene pressures we started this video with. So somewhere between wife capture myths that turned out to be fiction, and skeletons still locked in 6,000-year-old embraces, and Neanderthals with actual preferences, and brains possibly built by courtship itself, the thread runs in an unbroken line straight to a dating app on your phone right now. The methods changed completely. The underlying behavior barely moved at all. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.